I am Ashley, 34 years old, and a single mother to my 8-year-old son Jacob. My relationship with my family has always been complicated, especially with my sister Stephanie. Last month we visited my parents for Dad's birthday, hoping things would be different this time. I never imagined Stephanie would physically hurt Jacob and throw him into a rainstorm while my parents just laughed. Before I continue with this heartbreaking story, let me know where you are watching from, and subscribe if you want to hear how I finally stood up for my son and changed our lives forever. Growing up in our suburban Michigan home, the dynamic between my sister Stephanie and me was always painfully clear. She was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was constantly criticized for even the smallest mistakes. My father Harold, a stern accountant, praised Stephanie for her academic achievements and career ambitions, while my mother Dorothy, a former elementary school teacher, enabled this favoritism through her silence and occasional daughter participation. Our childhood home was immaculate, controlled and emotionally cold. Stephanie, 3 years older than me, quickly learned how to play into our parents' expectations. She was studious, organized, and never questioned authority. I, on the other hand, was more creative, emotional, and frequently found myself on the receiving end of my family's disapproval. When I became pregnant with Jacob at 26 after a whirlwind romance with Travis, my family's disappointment was palpable. My mother sighed deeply when I told her the news, while my father lectured me about responsibility. Stephanie, who was completing her MBA at the time, made a point of telling me how I was throwing away my potential. The only reason they somewhat accepted my pregnancy was because Travis and I quickly got married. Our marriage lasted 6 years before Travis decided family life was not what he wanted. The divorce 2 years ago left me struggling financially and emotionally. While Travis sends child support, it is often late and never enough. I work as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm, a job that barely covers our expenses. Jacob is a sensitive, creative child with boundless energy and imagination. He loves building elaborate structures with his blocks, creating stories with his action figures, and making art projects that inevitably spread glitter across our small apartment. He has his father's bright blue eyes and my curly brown hair, a combination that makes strangers stop and comment on what a beautiful child he is. But beyond his looks, Jacob has a gentle heart. He rescues spiders instead of killing them, shares his lunch with kids who forget theirs, and cries when characters in movies get hurt. My family never understood Jacob. To them, he was too loud, too emotional, too messy. Stephanie, now a successful corporate lawyer with no children of her own, made no effort to hide her discomfort around him. She would wince when he laughed too loudly, or make cutting remarks about his energy level being abnormal. My parents were only marginally better, often suggesting I needed to discipline him more strictly or commenting that boys his age should be more interested in sports than art. Despite their treatment of us, I occasionally relied on my family for help. When my car broke down last winter, and I needed $800 for repairs, my father loaned me the money, though not without a lecture about financial planning. When I had to work late, my mother sometimes watched Jacob, though she would report every minor infraction upon my return. There had been incidents before the birthday visit that should have warned me. Once, when Jacob accidentally spilled juice on Stephanie's designer purse, she grabbed his arm so hard it left fingerprint bruises. When I confronted her, she claimed he was running away, and she had to stop him. My parents sided with her, saying I was being overprotective. Another time during a family dinner, Jacob was humming quietly while drawing. Stephanie slammed her hand on the table and shouted at him to stop making noise. He cried for hours afterward, and my mother told me I needed to teach him to be more considerate of adults. Despite these warning signs, I continued hoping for their acceptance. I wanted Jacob to have extended family in his life. I wanted the support system that comes with having parents and a sister. I wanted to believe they could change. When my father's 65th birthday approached, my mother called insisting we attend the family dinner. She mentioned Stephanie would be there, but assured me she had spoken to her about being nicer to Jacob. I hesitated, but ultimately agreed. Jacob was excited about giving his grandfather the handmade card he had worked on for days, a beautiful illustration of my father fishing, his favorite hobby. As we drove to my parents' house that Saturday, rain clouds gathered on the horizon, matching my growing apprehension. Jacob chatted excitedly in the back seat, oblivious to my concerns. I gave myself a pep talk, determined to keep the peace for one afternoon. I rehearsed calm responses to potential criticisms, and reminded myself that we would be leaving after dinner. Pulling into the familiar driveway of the two-story colonial house I grew up in, I took a deep breath. The pristine garden and perfectly trimmed hedges reflected my parents' need for order and control. Jacob unbuckled his seatbelt, eager to show off his card and receive the affection he still innocently expected from his family. Little did I know that this visit would force me to make a choice I had been avoiding for years, and that by the end of the day, nothing would ever be the same. We were barely through the front door when Stephanie appeared, dressed impeccably in a tailored pantsuit. Despite this being a casual family gathering, her critical gaze immediately fell on Jacob. "Couldn't you have combed his hair before bringing him over?" she asked, not bothering with a greeting. Jacob's curls were slightly tousled from the car ride, but he looked perfectly fine. "Hello to you too, Stephanie," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Jacob, say hi to your aunt." Jacob, always eager to please, smiled brightly. "Hi, Aunt Stephanie. I like your necklace." She barely acknowledged his compliment with a curt nod, before turning to lead us into the living room where my parents waited. My father remained seated in his leather recliner as we entered, merely lifting his eyes from his newspaper. My mother at least stood to give me a quick hug, before fussing over Jacob's appearance, wetting her hand to try to flatten his curls. "Stop," Grandma Jacob protested, gently ducking away. "He just has unruly hair like I do," I explained, rescuing him from her grooming attempts. The conversation quickly turned to Stephanie's recent courtroom victory. My parents listened with rapt attention as she detailed how she had won a major case for her corporate client. My father beamed with pride, commenting on her brilliance and dedication. "And what about you, Ashley? Still at that little marketing office?" my mother asked after nearly 20 minutes of Stephanie's stories. "Yes, actually, I just got a small promotion I offered, hoping for some acknowledgement." "That's nice," my mother said dismissively, before turning back to Stephanie. "Tell us more about that partner position you're up for." While the adults talked, Jacob wandered over to a shelf displaying some of Stephanie's childhood trophies and awards. He reached out to touch a debate team trophy, fascinated by the golden figure on top. "Do not touch my things," Stephanie snapped, causing Jacob to jump back. "Those are valuable and irreplaceable." "I am sorry," Jacob whispered, his eyes wide. "I just wanted to see it." "He was not going to break anything, Stephanie," I said, feeling protective heat rise in my chest. "You do not know that. Your son has a history of being careless with other people's belongings," she replied coldly. Rather than escalate the situation, I called Jacob over to sit beside me on the couch. I quietly unpacked his small backpack of activities, handing him a coloring book and crayons. He settled in, still casting occasional nervous glances at his aunt. Dinner was a tense affair. My mother had prepared my father's favorite meal of pot roast with potatoes and carrots. Jacob, who was going through a picky eating phase, politely tried everything but struggled with the meat. "He needs protein to grow," my father commented, watching Jacob push the meat around his plate. When I was his age, I cleared my plate without complaint. "He is eating the potatoes and carrots," I defended, "and he tried the meat." "This is why he is so skinny," my mother chimed in. "Too much coddling." Stephanie's phone rang during dinner. She checked the caller ID and excused herself to take the call in the kitchen. We could hear her professional voice shift to irritation as the conversation continued. When she returned, her mood had visibly darkened. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to be polite. "Just work. A case I thought was settled is having complications," she replied tersely. "My entire weekend might be ruined now." Jacob, trying to lighten the mood, shared a joke he had learned at school. "Why did the picture go to jail?" "Because it was framed." He laughed at his own joke, his voice carrying in the dining room. Stephanie winced dramatically. "Must he be so loud?" she asked no one in particular. Jacob, indoor voice, I reminded him gently, though his volume had been perfectly normal. "You are too soft on him," Ashley, my mother, said. "Boys need a firmer hand, especially when they are naturally rowdy like Jacob." "He is not rowdy," I corrected. "He is just a normal 8-year-old boy." When Stephanie was 8, she could sit through entire dinner parties without making a peep, my father added. "Different children have different personalities," I said, feeling my patience wearing thin. "Different parenting style produce different results," my mother countered. I considered gathering our things and leaving right then. The criticism was already becoming unbearable, and we had not even made it to cake yet. But Jacob had been looking forward to giving my father his handmade card, and I did not want to disappoint him. "Can I be excused?" Jacob asked quietly, sensing the tension. "I want to finish my drawing for Grandpa." My mother nodded, and Jacob carefully took his plate to the kitchen before retrieving his backpack from the living room. He settled on the floor near the coffee table, spreading out his art supplies. As we finished dinner, Stephanie received another call. This one, apparently worse than the last. She returned to the table looking furious. "Everything I worked for this month is falling apart because some paralegal filed the wrong paperwork," she fumed. "Now I have to go into the office tomorrow to fix it." "That is terrible, sweetheart," my mother sympathized, patting her hand. "You work so hard." "It is not fair that your weekend is being ruined," my father agreed. I felt invisible as they continued to console Stephanie over what seemed like a minor work inconvenience. Meanwhile, Jacob was humming softly to himself as he colored, completely absorbed in creating his gift. The storm clouds that had been threatening all day finally opened up, rain beginning to patter against the windows. The sound normally soothed me, but today it felt ominous, a warning I was too stubborn to heed. After dinner, we moved to the living room. The rain intensified outside, drumming steadily against the roof and windows. Jacob had finished his card, but decided to wait for the cake to give it to my father. In the meantime, he took out the small toy truck he had brought along, rolling it quietly on the carpet and making occasional engine noises. Stephanie sat at the other end of the living room, aggressively typing on her laptop. Each time Jacob made a sound, she would glance up with increasing irritation. The fourth time he made a revving noise, she slammed her laptop shut. "Can you not control him for 5 minutes?" she asked me, her voice sharp enough to make Jacob freeze mid-play. "Some of us have actual work to do." "He is just playing quietly," I defended, though I still whispered to Jacob to try to be a little quieter. "That is not quiet," Stephanie countered. "I can barely hear myself think." My father looked up from his newspaper. "Ashley, perhaps Jacob could play in another room." "The whole point of coming here was to spend time together as a family," I reminded him, "not to hide Jacob away." "He is rather loud," my mother commented from her armchair. "Always has been. Remember when he was a toddler and would scream for hours?" "He had colic," I explained for what felt like the 100th time. That was not his fault. "I never had any of my colleagues' children act this way during company picnics," Stephanie added. "There is such a thing as teaching children appropriate behavior." I felt my cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. He is behaving appropriately for an 8-year-old child. Jacob, sensitive to the tension, had stopped playing entirely and was now sitting motionless, clutching his truck. I gave him a reassuring smile, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. "Why do not you take your truck to the dining room for a little while, sweetie?" I suggested, wanting to spare him from more criticism. "I will call you when it is time for cake." Jacob nodded and quietly left the room. Once he was out of earshot, I turned to my family. "I would appreciate if you would stop criticizing my son in front of him. He understands everything you are saying, and it hurts his feelings." "So we are supposed to tiptoe around him?" Stephanie asked incredulously. "This is exactly why children today have no respect for boundaries. Everyone is so worried about their precious feelings." "Empathy is not a weakness," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. And considering respect, you have shown very little for either of us today. That is enough, Ashley, my father interrupted. Stephanie has had a stressful day, and your defensiveness is not helping. Of course you would take her side, I muttered. What was that? He challenged. Nothing, I said, backing down as I had been conditioned to do my entire life. My mother stood up. I think it is time for cake. I will go get Jacob. As she left, Stephanie closed her laptop and rubbed her temples. I just do not understand why you brought him, if you knew I would be working. Some of us have demanding careers that do not stop for family gatherings. I brought him because he is family, and this is a family event, I replied. And being a single mother is plenty demanding. Stephanie scoffed. Please. You chose that life when you rushed into marriage with Travis. Some of us have professional responsibilities that actually matter. Before I could respond, we heard a crash from the dining room, followed by my mother's gasp. We all rushed in to find one of my mother's decorative plates in pieces on the floor, and Jacob standing nearby looking terrified. I am so sorry, he exclaimed. I was just looking at it. It slipped. That was an antique, my mother cried, as if he had destroyed a priceless artifact, rather than one of the many decorative plates she collected from gift shops. It was an accident, I said, already moving to help clean up. We will replace it. With what money? My father asked sarcastically. You can barely make rent. Stephanie was staring at Jacob with pure disdain. This is exactly what I was talking about. No respect for other people's property. Jacob's eyes welled with tears. I did not mean to. I am really sorry, Grandma. My mother was gathering the broken pieces, shaking her head. This is why children need discipline, Ashley. He needs to learn there are consequences for carelessness. It was an accident, I repeated firmly. He already apologized. An apology does not fix my plate, my mother retorted. I will buy you a new one, I promised, though we all knew I could barely afford groceries, let alone decorative antiques. Just like you were going to repay the money for the car repair, my father asked pointedly. We are still waiting on that. I felt cornered and defensive. I am doing my best. Your best is clearly not good enough, Stephanie said. Not for parenting, and not for being a responsible adult. Jacob was now crying silently, his small shoulders shaking. I put my arm around him protectively. That is enough, I said. We are going to step outside for a few minutes to calm down. Then we will have cake, give Dad his presents, and leave. I guided Jacob toward the back porch, desperate for a moment, away from the criticism and tension. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, and the covered porch would give us space to breathe. As we reached the door, my phone rang. It was Andrew, my boss. Despite the terrible timing, I had to take it. We were in the middle of a major project, and he rarely called on weekends unless it was important. I need to take this, I told Jacob. Wait here, and I will be right back. I stepped into the hallway, answering the call, as I walked toward the front of the house for privacy. I had no idea that those few minutes away from Jacob would lead to the most horrifying moment of my life as a mother. The call from Andrew was brief but crucial. A client had an emergency request that needed immediate attention, and he needed me to check some files I had access to from my home computer. I promised to handle it as soon as I got home already, planning our early exit from this disastrous family visit. As I ended the call and turned to head back to Jacob, a piercing scream stopped me in my tracks. It was my son's voice, filled with fear and pain. My heart seemed to stop as I sprinted toward the sound coming from the family room. The scene that greeted me will haunt me forever. Stephanie had Jacob by his shoulders, shaking him violently. His toy truck lay on the carpet beside her laptop, which had fallen to the floor. As I watched in horror, Stephanie drew back her hand and slapped Jacob hard across his face, the sound cracking through the room like lightning. You stupid, careless brat, she screamed, her face contorted with rage. Jacob was sobbing, his small body trembling, as he tried to pull away from her grip. My parents stood nearby, making no move to intervene. What are you doing? I shouted, rushing forward. Get your hands off my son! But before I could reach them, Stephanie dragged Jacob toward the back door, his feet barely touching the ground as he struggled against her. Your brat ruined my day, she screamed, yanking the door open. The rain had intensified again, now pouring down in sheets. With a forceful shove, she pushed Jacob out onto the porch and beyond into the storm. Maybe cooling off will teach you some manners. Jacob stumbled down the steps into the yard, the rain immediately soaking through his clothes. He stood there, rain plastering his curls to his forehead, one hand touching his reddened cheek in shock. Jacob, I cried, trying to push past Stephanie to reach my son. She blocked the doorway. Let him think about what he has done. Are you insane? I shouted, finally shoving her aside with a strength I did not know I possessed. He is 8 years old. As I moved to run outside, I heard something that stopped me cold. Laughter. My parents were laughing. My father had settled back into his recliner, shaking his head with amusement, while my mother stood with her hand covering her mouth, shoulders shaking with mirth. He needs to learn his value, my mother said between chuckles. Stephanie is right. A little rain never hurt anyone. I stared at them in disbelief, these people who were supposed to love and protect their grandson. In that moment, something inside me broke and reformed harder and stronger than before. Without another word to them, I rushed outside into the downpour. Jacob stood in the middle of the yard, rain mixing with his tears, his body shivering. When he saw me, he ran into my arms, clinging to me desperately. Mommy, he sobbed against my chest. Why does Aunt Stephanie hate me? Why did she hit me? She was wrong, baby, I whispered fiercely, holding him close. So wrong. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. I led him to my car, opening the back door and wrapping him in the emergency blanket I kept in my trunk. His cheek was red and beginning to swell, a clear handprint visible on his pale skin. The sight of that mark ignited something primal within me. Stay here, I told him gently. Lock the doors. I am going to get our things, and then we are leaving, and never coming back. Promise? He asked, his voice small and frightened. I promise, I vowed, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Soaking wet, I marched back into the house. My family was in the living room, acting as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Stephanie had retrieved her laptop and was checking it for damage. My parents were discussing whether to serve cake now or wait. What do you think you are doing? I demanded, my voice dangerously quiet. Stephanie barely looked up. Teaching your son a lesson about respecting other people's property. He knocked my laptop off the table with his stupid toy. Do you have any idea what client information I have on here? So you physically assaulted a child and threw him into a rainstorm? I asked incredulously. Assault is a strong word, my father interjected. She was disciplining him. That was not discipline. That was abuse, I stated firmly. And I will be gathering our things and leaving now. You are overreacting. As usual, my mother sighed. Always so dramatic. Dramatic? I repeated, my voice rising. She slapped my son across the face hard enough to leave a mark. She threw him outside in a thunderstorm. And you laughed. He ran into my computer while playing with that truck, Stephanie defended. He needed to be taught a lesson. No child deserves to be hit, I said, trembling with rage. Ever. Maybe if you had disciplined him properly in the first place, I would not have had to step in, Stephanie retorted. Step in, I laughed bitterly. You assaulted my child because you had a bad day at work and wanted someone to take it out on. Now see here, my father stood up, his voice authoritative. If you cannot accept how we handle things in this family, perhaps you should reconsider your financial dependence on us. That car repair money could become due immediately. It was the final manipulation, the last attempt to control me through financial means. In that moment, I realized just how toxic my family truly was, and how I had been enabling their treatment of Jacob by maintaining contact. Keep your money, I said coldly. I would rather work 3 jobs than subject my son to this family for another minute. You will never survive without our help, my mother warned. Single motherhood is hard enough with support. What support? I asked. All you have ever done is criticize, belittle, and now physically harm us. That is not support. That is abuse. He was just being disciplined, my mother insisted. No, I stated firmly. This ends today. The cycle of abuse stops with me. Jacob deserves better, and so do I. I quickly gathered our belongings, ignoring their continued justifications and threats. Jacob's handmade card for my father lay forgotten on the coffee table. I left it there, a final reminder of the innocent love they had rejected. As I headed for the door, Stephanie called after me. You will be back. You always come crawling back when you need something. I turned to face my family one last time. Not anymore. You have shown me exactly who you are today, and I believe you. I will not be back, and you will never hurt my son again. With those words, I walked out, closing the door on that chapter of our lives forever. The drive away from my parents' house was silent, except for Jacob's occasional sniffles. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, checking on him, as he huddled under the blanket. The handprint on his cheek had deepened to an angry red mark, and worry gnawed at my stomach. How are you feeling, sweetheart? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My face hurts, he admitted quietly, and I am cold. We are going to the hospital to have a doctor look at your cheek, I told him already, turning toward the emergency room, and to make sure you are okay. Are we really never going back to Grandma and Grandpa's house? He asked, his voice small but hopeful. Really never, I confirmed. I am so sorry I kept taking you there. I am sorry I did not protect you better. It is not your fault, Mom, he said with a wisdom beyond his years. Aunt Stephanie is mean. She has always been mean. His simple observation broke my heart. Children see the truth so clearly, sometimes uncluttered by the complications adults create. I had allowed my desire for family connection to override the evidence right in front of me. You are right, I acknowledged, and I should have listened to what you were telling me all along. At the emergency room, the triage nurse took one look at Jacob's face and brought us back immediately. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Elizabeth, examined him thoroughly, taking pictures of the handprint bruise for medical records. How did this happen? She asked professionally, though her eyes were gentle. I told her the truth, every awful detail. As a mandated reporter, I knew she would have to inform Child Protective Services, but I had nothing to hide. I was the one protecting my child now. You did the right thing bringing him in and removing him from that situation, Dr. Elizabeth assured me. The bruising should heal within a week or so, but the emotional trauma might take longer. She gave Jacob a popsicle and me referrals to a pediatric therapist and legal aid services. For the restraining order, she explained quietly. You might want to consider one. While Jacob enjoyed his popsicle, I stepped into the hallway to make a call. My friend Heather had always offered her guest room if we ever needed it, and tonight we desperately did. Of course you can stay with us, she said immediately after I explained what had happened. Come over, as soon as you are done at the hospital. I will make up the guest room. Relief washed over me at her unhesitating support. At least we would have a safe place to sleep tonight. As we left the hospital, my phone began buzzing with texts and calls from my family. I glimpsed the first few messages before silencing the phone entirely. From Mom, you are making a mountain out of a molehill. Call us when you calm down. From Dad, your sister is devastated that you would accuse her of abuse. She was just disciplining him. From Stephanie, my laptop is damaged. You will be hearing from my lawyer. Their messages confirmed what I already knew. They felt no remorse. They saw nothing wrong with what had happened. The realization was both painful and freeing. There was no relationship worth salvaging here. We arrived at Heather's house just after 9:30. She greeted us at the door with warm hugs and led us to the guest room where she had already laid out fresh towels and pajamas for Jacob. My son Justin outgrew these recently, she explained, showing Jacob the superhero pajamas. They should fit you perfectly. While Jacob showered and changed, I sat at Heather's kitchen table, finally letting the tears come. She placed a cup of tea in front of me and sat beside me, her presence a comfort. "I cannot believe they did this," I whispered. "I cannot believe I let it go on so long." "You were trying to give Jacob an extended family," Heather said gently. "That is not wrong, but you are doing the right thing now." "I do not know what I am going to do," I admitted. "Dad threatened to demand immediate repayment of the money he loaned me for car repairs. I can barely make rent as it is." "One step at a time," Heather advised. "Tonight you and Jacob are safe. Tomorrow we will figure out the next step." That night I slept on a trundle bed next to Jacob in the guest room. He had nightmares twice, waking up, crying and calling for me. Each time I held him close, promising that he was safe, that no one would hurt him again. In the darkness of Heather's guest room I made silent vows to my son. I would never again prioritize toxic family relationships over his well-being. I would find a way to support us without their help. I would build a life where he felt safe, valued, and loved unconditionally. The road ahead would be difficult, but as I watched Jacob finally sleep peacefully, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. Some bridges need to be burned, especially when they lead to places that harm the ones we love most. The morning after the incident, I called into work while Jacob still slept. Andrew answered immediately, concern evident in his voice, when I explained I needed a few days off for a family emergency. "Is everything okay?" he asked. I hesitated, then decided honesty was best. My sister physically assaulted Jacob yesterday. We are staying with a friend, and I need to sort out some legal and housing issues." His response surprised me. "Take the week, Ashley. And if you need to work remotely after that, we can arrange it. Your priority needs to be Jacob right now." "Thank you," I said, emotion catching in my throat. "I do not know what to say." "You do not need to say anything," Andrew replied. "Just take care of your son. The team will cover for you." With work temporarily sorted, I made 2 more crucial calls while Jacob ate breakfast with Heather's family. The first was to a family lawyer recommended by the hospital. Cynthia Marshall agreed to see us that afternoon for a consultation about a restraining order. The second call was to Charlotte Wilson, a child therapist who specialized in trauma. She had an opening the following day and assured me she would help Jacob process what had happened. As I ended the calls, my phone buzzed with yet another message from my mother. "Your father and I are very disappointed in your behavior. Stephanie was disciplining Jacob for destroying her property. You need to apologize and come home." The message confirmed what I already knew. They felt no remorse. They saw nothing wrong with hitting a child. With a deep breath I blocked their numbers, then did the same for Stephanie. The immediate relief I felt told me everything I needed to know about how toxic they had become in our lives. Jacob emerged from breakfast, looking a little brighter than the night before, though the bruise on his cheek had darkened to a purplish mark. Heather's son Justin had offered to share his video games, and the distraction seemed to help. "We have some appointments today," I told Jacob gently, "and we need to talk about what happened yesterday." He nodded solemnly. "Am I in trouble for breaking Aunt Stephanie's computer?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "You did not break it. You accidentally knocked it over while playing, and even if it was damaged, that never gives anyone the right to hit you or put you in danger." "But Grandma and Grandpa thought it was okay," he said, confusion evident in his voice. They laughed. The memory of their laughter still made my blood boil. "They were wrong, Jacob. Very wrong. No one is allowed to hurt you ever. Not family, not teachers, not friends. No one." We spent the morning looking at apartment listings in a neighborhood across town, farther from my parents but closer to Jacob's school. The rents were slightly higher than what we currently paid, but I was determined to make it work somehow. At 2, we met with Cynthia Marshall. Her office was warm and inviting, with comfortable chairs and a small play area where Jacob could occupy himself while we spoke. "Based on what you have described, and the hospital report, you have grounds for a restraining order against your sister," Cynthia explained. "Possibly against your parents as well, since they enabled the abuse." Will we have to go to court? I asked, glancing at Jacob. Possibly, but I would represent you, she said. And Jacob would only need to appear if absolutely necessary. I want to do whatever it takes to keep him safe, I told her. Cost is a concern, but safety is more important. Cynthia smiled. There are victim advocacy programs that can help with the legal fees. Let us focus on protection first, finances second. We left her office with paperwork filed for an emergency restraining order against Stephanie, and a plan to document any further contact attempts from my family. The next day, Jacob had his first session with Charlotte. While he was talking with her, I sat in the waiting room making calls about apartments. A text message came through, from a number I did not recognize. This is Alicia from church. Your mother asked me to check on you. She said you had a misunderstanding and took Jacob away. She is very worried. My heart raced. They were already using mutual connections to try to manipulate me into contact. I deleted the message without responding and made a mental note to be careful about who I spoke to from our former social circles. When Jacob emerged from his therapy session, Charlotte asked to speak with me privately for a moment. Jacob is showing signs of anxiety related to the incident, she explained. But he is also very resilient. He told me he feels safe with you and knows you will protect him now. Her words were both validating and heartbreaking. I should have protected him sooner. You are protecting him now, Charlotte emphasized. That is what matters moving forward. Over the next few weeks, we established a new routine. Jacob continued therapy twice weekly. I worked remotely when possible, and relied on Heather for childcare when I needed to go into the office. We found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, with a park nearby, and signed a lease with the help of my first and last month's rent savings. Financial struggles were real. Without my parents' occasional help, I had to budget meticulously. I took on freelance administrative work in the evenings after Jacob went to bed, often working until midnight to make ends meet. But the freedom from criticism, manipulation, and fear was worth every sacrifice. The restraining order against Stephanie was granted, officially barring her from coming within 100 yards of Jacob or me. My parents continued their campaign of manipulation through mutual friends, and even Jacob's school, where my mother tried to pick him up one day, claiming it was an emergency. Thankfully, the school had been informed of the situation and denied her access. One evening, as I helped Jacob with homework at our small kitchen table in the new apartment, he looked up at me with serious eyes. Mom, are you sad that we do not see Grandma and Grandpa anymore? I considered my answer carefully. I am sad that they could not be the loving grandparents you deserve. But I am not sad about our decision to stay away from people who hurt you. Family should make you feel loved and safe, not scared and hurt. He nodded thoughtfully. I like our new family better. Our new family? I asked, curious. Yeah, you and me and Heather and Justin and Dr. Charlotte and even Mr. Andrew when he comes over to help with your work computer. They are nicer than our old family. His observation brought tears to my eyes. Out of the trauma, we had indeed built a new kind of family, a chosen one based on respect and genuine care, rather than obligation and blood ties. I like our new family better too, I agreed, hugging him close. 6 months after that rainy day, when everything changed, Jacob and I stood in our apartment hanging new curtains. The bruise on his cheek had long since faded, but the lessons from that day remained indelibly marked on both our lives. Do you think these are too blue? I asked, stepping back to assess the curtains. Jacob considered them seriously. I like them. They match the sky on good days. His perspective made me smile. At 8.5, he was still full of wonder and insight, but the shadows that had haunted his eyes in the months following the incident were gradually fading. Dr. Charlotte, whom he still saw once a week, had helped him process the trauma in ways I could not have managed alone. Good days are becoming more common, are not they? I remarked, ruffling his curls. He nodded. Dr. Charlotte says that is because we are healing. The wisdom in his response reminded me how resilient children can be when given the right support. In the months since we had cut ties with my family, Jacob had slowly regained his confidence. He no longer flinched at sudden movements or apologized excessively for minor accidents. He laughed freely again, his natural exuberance returning like spring after a harsh winter. Our lives had changed in practical ways too. The freelance work I had taken on to make ends meet had unexpectedly led to a job offer from one of my clients, a small publishing company looking for an administrative director. The position paid significantly better than my previous job and offered flexible hours that worked around Jacob's school schedule. Andrew had been supportive throughout the transition, providing references and even helping me prepare for the interview. "You deserve this opportunity," he had told me. "I have always known you were capable of more than the position we had for you." Our new apartment, though small, had become a true home. Photographs of our chosen family decorated the walls. Holiday cards from Heather's family displayed prominently on the refrigerator. We had established new traditions like Sunday pancake breakfasts and movie nights with Justin and Heather. The restraining order against Stephanie remained in place, a legal boundary that reinforced the emotional one I had drawn. My parents had eventually stopped trying to contact us through intermediaries, their messages becoming less frequent until they ceased entirely about 3 months after the incident. Then, last week, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably my father's. 1. I had stared at it for a long time before opening it, unsure whether to read it or throw it away. Curiosity finally won out. The letter was brief, written in my father's characteristically formal style. He acknowledged that things had gotten out of hand that day, though he stopped short of calling it abuse. He expressed that he and my mother missed Jacob and would like to start fresh with supervised visits when we are ready. There was no true apology, no real accountability, just a carefully worded invitation to return to their lives on their terms. The old me might have seen it as an olive branch, might have convinced myself it was worth trying again for Jacob's sake, but I knew better now. I had shown the letter to Charlotte during my own counseling session, seeking guidance on whether to respond at all. "What do you want to do?" she had asked simply. Part of me wants to write back and tell them exactly how their actions affected Jacob, how they failed as grandparents and parents, I admitted. But another part thinks any response just opens a door that should stay closed. "Those are both valid responses," Charlotte had said. "The question is, what serves your healing and Jacob's healing best right now?" After reflection, I decided to keep the letter, but not respond immediately. Perhaps someday, when our healing was further along, there might be room for a carefully boundaried relationship with my parents. But not with Stephanie, and not until they could fully acknowledge and take responsibility for their actions. As Jacob and I finished hanging the curtains, the doorbell rang. It was Heather dropping off a small potted plant for our windowsill. "Just wanted to bring a little more life into your space," she said, handing it to Jacob. "It is a peace lily, pretty hard to kill, even for plant novices." "Thank you," Jacob exclaimed, immediately finding the perfect spot for it on the kitchen counter. After Heather left Jacob, and I sat down to dinner, a simple meal of spaghetti and salad. As we ate, I marveled at how far we had come. 6 months ago, I had been financially dependent on toxic family members, constantly walking on eggshells and allowing my son to be mistreated in the name of maintaining family connections. Mom, Jacob's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "I am glad we left that day and never went back." "Me too, sweetheart," I said, "though I wish it had not taken something so terrible to make me see clearly." "Dr. Charlotte says sometimes the worst days lead to the best decisions," he replied, twirling spaghetti on his fork. The wisdom in his statement struck me deeply. That horrible day, watching my sister strike my child and my parents laugh about it, had been the catalyst for the most important decision of my life. By choosing Jacob's well-being over toxic family ties, I had not only protected him, but also freed myself from patterns of abuse I had normalized my entire life. The profound lesson I had learned was that family is not about blood or obligation. It is about love, respect, and safety. It is about creating spaces where people can thrive, rather than merely survive. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your children is to walk away from those who harm you, even when society pressures you to forgive and maintain connections, simply because they are family. Breaking the cycle of abuse requires courage, but the peace that follows is worth every difficult step. Jacob and I were living proof that healing is possible, that new beginnings can emerge from painful endings. As we finished dinner and settled in for our nightly reading ritual, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life we were building together. It was not perfect. We still had financial challenges. Jacob still occasionally had nightmares. I still sometimes doubted my decisions. But we were safe, we were healing, and we were loved for exactly who we were. "What story would you like tonight?" I asked, as Jacob climbed into bed. "Can you tell me again about how brave you were the day you saved me from the rain?" he requested. It had become one of his favorite stories, not because of the trauma, but because of what came after. The courage, the boundaries, the new beginning. As I began the story, I thought about how our narrative had transformed from one of victimhood to one of empowerment. By standing firm in my decision to protect Jacob at all costs, I had taught him the most valuable lesson: that he deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, and that no one, not even family, had the right to hurt him. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between maintaining family relationships and protecting yourself or your children? Comment below and share your thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content about setting boundaries and breaking cycles of family trauma. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what hurts you, even when it comes disguised as family love. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength on your own journey toward healing and peace.